This top is the fourth piece for the project. I already explained in the previous video, and although this is meant to be the sort of partial bodice used for when photographing the hairdos, this could be used really as a garment. It is an entire top. I didn't keep track of the time I used for the other ones, but for this it was really easy. This took me 2 days. The school days last for 6 hours, and so that is 12 hours for this, from starting with the basic dress pattern to getting it all finished. In the first day I made the pattern and finished the bodice, and the second day was spent making that ruffle, and that wasn't easy. It was interesting, but definitely not easy. Let's start with the pattern. Here on the left you can see the first steps, tracing the basic pattern to pattern paper, and then I closed the upper dart. You can see here on the left in the picture, and that made the lower darts really wide. So this probably wouldn't work if you had sort of distinctive patterns. I'm sure that would mess up patterns if you try to do that with something other than fabric with single color, but it worked for this purpose. And then I draw this curved line and cut off that piece on the upper right and close the lower dart on the right, because as you can see, when I cut that piece on the upper right, part of that dart was cut off, so there was no point having two separate pieces there. I could just glue the rightmost piece there in the right lower corner into the pattern. So there's one piece with a huge dart, and then in the picture on the right you can see there are some shadowed areas. Those are where I just removed some of the pattern to make bigger armholes, and especially behind the neck it needed to be, the edge needed to be lower. And I also moved the upper dart here as well, because removing that part of the pattern that shadowed there, it was easier when the dart was in the place where it is now. And it would have looked really odd to have the dart in its original place, so I moved it basically in the same way as I did in the yellow piece. And I think that's it for the changes in these pieces. So let's see what's next. Okay, here I have cut the patterns from paper, and I tried them on this dummy just to see that everything looks the way it should, and it was otherwise okay, but that curved line needed a bit more curve, so I just drew the line with the pattern on the dummy so it was easy to see where it should go. And you can really go freehand with curved lines. There are rulers for dressmakers, rulers for all sorts of curvy patterns, but I just drew it where I thought it looked the best, and everything was otherwise fine. So then I glued the pieces on pattern paper and drew the seam allowances. You don't need to do that necessarily, but it makes things easier if you draw the seam allowances to the pattern, because then you can just go along the edges of the pattern and you can be sure that all the seam allowances are there and they are what they are supposed to be. Here you can see the finished bodice, and in the middle is the beginnings of that ruffle, and it's long. That ruler in the picture is 1 meter long, and I think that ruffle was 3 meters because that was really thin fabric, so I thought it probably would need a lot of shortening, gathering it all together, so 3 meters was safe length. It wouldn't be too short in any case. It turned out to be a bit too long. In the end I cut a bit off, but it's always better to make a bit too long because you can cut away any extra, but adding, well, of course you can add, but adding means an extra seam, and it would not look nice to have a seam in something like this. And here on the right you can see the ruffle. There's two parts. I think the one in the middle picture is the wider one, and then I made one a bit narrower, and then I just gathered them both and then stitched them on top of each other, and the result is what you can see here on the right. And here are more pictures of the finished item. I could have used the ruffle as it was, but I wanted to just hide the stitches and get something extra in this entire thing, so I stitched this narrow band in the middle, so it kind of separates the two halves of a ruffle a bit, and it peeks out from in between them, and I think it looks nicer than it looked without this.